You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News, Balitang Thinking, Hindi Breaking. In this episode,
Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. This report is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector and on every time frame. In short, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once.
a United Nations panel has issued a stark warning. This is our last chance to avoid climate catastrophe.
As today's report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, details, humans are responsible for virtually all global heating over the last 200 years.
That's United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He was discussing the findings of a comprehensive review that took the UN panel, or the IPCC, several years to complete. The final report was released just last week.
The rate of temperature rise in the last half century is the highest in 2,000 years. Concentrations of carbon dioxide are at their highest in at least 2 million years. The climate time bomb is ticking.
Currently, the world is 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels. Once we hit 1.5 degrees Celsius, the damage to our climate will swiftly become irreversible. Detailed in the report are the millions of lives and homes that have already been lost to the extreme weather caused by climate change. Extreme weather is also driving displacement across several countries. But it's not all bad news. Although we're quickly losing time, it's not too late.
The 1.5 degree limit is achievable, but it will take a quantum leap in climate action. Today's IPCC report is a how-to guide to defuse the climate time bomb. It is a survival guide for humanity.
As expected, the report said the world's richest countries need to do more. Much of the work is being coordinated through the G20, or the Group of 20, a forum of the world's largest economies.
I have proposed to the G20 a climate solidarity pact in which all big emitters make extra efforts to cut emissions and wealthier countries mobilize financial and technical resources to support emerging economies in a common effort to keep 1.5 degrees alive. Today, I am presenting a plan to supercharge efforts to achieve this climate solidarity pact through an all-hands-on-deck acceleration agenda.
Here's what that agenda entails.
It starts with parties immediately hitting the fast-forward button on their net zero deadlines to get to global net zero by 2050. Specifically, leaders of developed countries must commit to reaching net zero as close as possible to 2040, the limit they should all aim to respect. This can be done. Some have already set a target as early as 2035. Leaders in emerging economies must commit to reaching net zero as close as possible to 2050.
We'll pause here, but when we return, let's talk about that fund to help poorer nations cope with global warming. So the good news is that the UN said there's still time to quote-unquote defuse the climate climb bomb. The bad news is meeting these deadlines they've set, which are less than 30 years away, require major political gumption.
The acceleration agenda calls for a number of other actions. Specifically, no new coal and the phasing out of coal by 2030 in OECD countries and 2040 in all other countries. Ending all international public and private funding of coal. Ensuring net zero electricity generation by 2035 for all developed countries and 2040 for the rest of the world. Seizing all licensing or funding of new oil and gas, shifting subsidies from fossil fuels to a just energy transition, establishing a global phase-down of existing oil and gas production compatible with the 2050 global net zero target.
The UN chief also called on CEOs of key industries to quickly enact plans to cut emissions this decade and to scale up renewable energy.
Shipping, aviation, steel, cement, aluminum, agriculture, every sector must be aligned with net zero by 2050 with clear plans, including interim targets to get there. At the same time, we need to seize the opportunity to invest in credible innovations that can contribute to reaching our global targets.
It was just last year that rich nations in the UN finally signed off on a loss and damage fund meant to help poorer nations cope with extreme weather events. That was a major victory for island nations like the Philippines. But this was just an initial step. Working out the trickier details, like how much each country should contribute, will take more time.
The longer we wait on any of these crucial issues, the harder it will become.
Next year, the world's leaders will gather for the 28th Conference of Parties, or COP28, the UN's annual climate summit. The stakes will be higher than ever.
By the end of COP28, I count on all G20 leaders to have committed to ambitious new economy-wide nationally determined contributions encompassing all greenhouse gases and indicating their absolute emission cut targets for 2035 and 2040. The transition must cover the entire economy. Partial pledges won't cut it.
Individuals and communities have a role to play as well. Speaking to the BBC, Greenpeace senior political advisor Kaisa Konsen said projected 2050 emissions could be cut by 40 to 70% through end-use measures like cutting back on meat, flying less, and building more bike and pedestrian-friendly cities. Here's UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres again.
We have never been better equipped to solve the climate challenge, but we must move into warp speed climate action now. We don't have a moment to lose. Every country must be part of the solution. Demanding others move first only ensures humanity comes last.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was edited by Pidoy Blanco. If you like this episode, share it with a friend or two. And don't forget to give it a 5-star rating on your podcast app. At para sa mga mahilig manood sa YouTube, Puma Podcast na rin po kami doon. Just search Puma Podcast and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for listening.